Dan and Amy, 300 women in Springfield who work in and around state government signed a letter last year decrying the culture of sexual harassment and abuse inside and around state government. At that time, only one woman who had come forward, Denise Rothheimer, we've had on the show. Her allegations and the ultimate finding of fault with respect to State Senator Ira Silverstein cost him his seat. He lost the primary election. Now you've had three more women come forward. Elena Hampton, a former Madigan staffer, making allegations of harassment by one of Madigan's field goons. You had a woman come forward, an advocate, and accuse Madigan's deputy majority leader, Lou Lang, of inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, she was on our show.
Marianne Lancour. You've had Kelly Cassidy, who's a state rep in the Democrat caucus, talk of her mistreatment. Frankly, you've had another state rep, Deb Conroy, in the caucus last year. She didn't want to go against Madigan. She didn't want to say anything negative about Madigan. She didn't want to say anything at all about it, but she was also harassed by the same person, allegedly, that harassed Elena Hampton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there seems to be
or one of the two that was pegged at the time, and now you've got this Sherry Garrett.
Right. There seems to be a locker room environment going on down there in Springfield. Sherry Garrett coming forward yesterday is talking about multiple instances of being bullied and harassment.
Over the course of the last several years, I have endured and have personally witnessed bullying and repeated harassment that was often sexual and sexist in nature in my workplace. In my case, this harassment has taken place at the highest levels in the State House. Tim Mapes, Chief of Staff to Speaker Madigan, has made repeated inappropriate comments to me and around me, both in the office and on the House floor.
So Tim Mapes, Madigan's implementation guy for a long time, he then hastily resigns. I mean, the speed of this was really interesting because to me it indicates Madigan is in full self-survival mode. She has a press conference at 11 a.m. yesterday, makes the charges, names Mapes, Madigan's chief of staff. By early afternoon, Mapes resigned, Madigan putting out a press release that Mapes resigned at his
but from everything. I mean, he also resigned as the executive director of the Democratic Party of Illinois. But what he did to Sherry Garrett allegedly is made really lewd, inappropriate comments.
Tim Mapes said, completely out of nowhere, that I needed to make sure that I was not showing my pink bra to the judge during Inauguration Day, because he knows how the girls who work on the second floor like to leave little to the imagination.
And the point of contention is that when women felt harassed or bullied, they had to go through Tim Mapes to get to Mike Madigan.
The only way as an employee to see Speaker Madigan is you have to make an appointment through Tim.
The interesting thing is that you've got the inner sanctum of Madigan that has been pierced. And so the question is, one of the questions, all of the virtue signaling Me Too types that rallied to pass the Equal Rights Amendment 400 years after its introduction.
Well, 36, but okay.
this past session,
yeah.
Because they're such proponents of women.
Uh-huh. Oh,
Where are they now? Jeannie Ives, a proponent of women from a different direction, a Republican, of course, had this to say.
The Democrats have a real problem in this culture of sexual harassment, and it's not going to get changed with Speaker Madigan in charge.
For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Kristen McQueary, she of the Chicago Tribune editorial board. Kristen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Editorial in the Chicago Tribune. When will Democrat members, especially those who make a public show of their opposition to harassment, grow a spine? They're all about #MeToo when it's trendy, just not when it actually matters. Is there any indication, Kristen, that spines are growing in the wake of the Mapes resignation?
I mean, not yet, but as you mentioned, you can't get any closer to Madigan than Tim Mapes. This is someone who's been his chief of staff since the early 90s. Everything goes through Tim Mapes. On those days when session is really busy, He's the person setting up the committee rooms. He's the person deciding who's going to sit on the committees. He's subbing people out. He's providing staff. He decides if you get an attorney to help with your petitions when it's time to run. He decides what bills get assigned to you. So this is kind of Speaker Madigan's gatekeeper, hatchet man. The fact that he's gone, I think, will kind of settle a lot of that uprising. But this is as close as it gets to hitting the speaker directly. But
there's, she complained of multiple instances of bullying and harassment, but this isn't really sexual abuse or sexual assault.
Not at all. And I think the issue with Tim Mapes is not going to rest on sexual harassment. Yes, he made these comments which were highly inappropriate. And he made them, by the way, during all of this. One of the accusers' claims happened as recently as a couple of months ago when they were all having to go through sexual harassment training, and Tim Mapes was kind of belittling it and mocking it and joking around to some of the male members. Had they gone to their sex training yet today? So this is all very recent. But no, I think the bigger issue with him, because I think male staffers and lawmakers would come forward too, that he runs a very tight ship, and that's putting it nicely. That whole label that you attach to Madigan, how disciplined he is, that's because of someone like Tim Mapes. And just the stories I've heard over the years from lawmakers, male and female, about how he doles out punishment. I mean, you mentioned Kelly Cassidy earlier, North Side lawmaker. Tim Mapes made a phone call to her boss. She was doing some part-time work for Tom Dart, just to inquire about her employment status. That was a signal, because she was starting to get out of line. And those are the types of things that he's done over the years. I've heard lawmakers who didn't behave as they were supposed to be. They got their seats moved in the House chamber. They didn't get attorneys to help them gather petitions. Just a lot of these backdoor channels of keeping people in their places. And I just want to mention one more thing. The Tribune years ago did a story trying to connect how many people in government got their jobs through Mike Madigan / Tim Mapes. And they were able to track it to 400 people and positions. What? That's just how many they were able to track.
There's exponentially more than that. I mean,
yes.
It's in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Over 40 years, 400, that's nothing. But I understand what you're saying, which is what you could substantiate. Here's the thing. I mean, the Kelly Cassidy thing, notwithstanding the propriety of a state rep being an employee of the sheriff's office or these state legislators that are employees of or lobbyists for other governmental units, the inherent conflict of that. The question is the combination of the progressive caucus within the Chicago Democrat Party. I mean, I guess that's what it is. That's the power structure. I mean, I guess that's increasingly the whole party as they move left, just as what's happening at the national level, the hard move left. Is there any sense that there is an uprising against Madigan with Mapes out of the way, that now he's actually weaker, and this is the chance to make the move? Maybe the hard leftists like Kelly Cassidy and Gazzardi and some of the other ones, combined with the J.B. Pritzker, who doesn't need to have Madigan to worry about as he's running for governor.
It's certainly possible, but the reason I raise those 400 positions is because those are family members of a lot of these lawmakers. And so Madigan he's not going to let go of that grip of power, and he still does have influence over these members. And just think about what Madigan has survived. He was very close to Joe Barrios. He has escaped any scrutiny for the most part over the whole scandal with how the property tax system works.
Yeah.
He was part of a federal investigation in the early 2000s, handing out bonuses to state workers that federal investigators in Central Illinois were looking at. He survived the patronage scandal at Metra just a couple of years ago. He has survived the clout scholarships, giving scholarships to U of I and other.
Yeah, but this is different. This is different because it's everybody gets this, and it's like a national. There's national zeitgeist behind it. This is not some.
Well, the Me Too movement has taken down more powerful men than Mike Madigan.
Well, but right, but like comparing this to like a Metra patronage scandal, that's so inside baseball in a city in a state that's inured to corruption. This is something different, don't you think?
I mean, I guess if I were seeing some sort of reaction from these lawmakers that you mentioned, I've been calling them out on Twitter, just reminding them that they were all part of the Me Too march. They marched in the streets. They wear the pink hats. They all wore black during Rauner's State of the State address in January as a sign of solidarity. And they're not saying anything. I haven't even seen like a press release except for maybe one of them. So that's why I'm not feeling that they're going to go after Madigan. I think removing Tim Mapes kind of removes the cancer, and they will be satisfied with that.
Everybody's pretty jumpy, though. I mean, Governor Rauner, former Governor Rauner, he called for Ken Duncan's resignation from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Board yesterday because Ken Duncan was one of the legislators that was named by Sherry Garrett as having been inappropriate with her, which is
because he was naughty with her. No, he allegedly asked two ladies who would be the naughtiest if they went back to his house. I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah, well, that's and it's not surprising either, unfortunately. But Duncan was recently appointed to MWRD by Rauner, which is a payback from that vote against stripping the governor of his collective bargaining powers. And he calls on Duncan to resign just weeks after he appointed him. So everybody's pretty jumpy about this.
They absolutely are. I mean, that was just a joke. I mean, he got the appointment through Rauner. He has no experience on MWRD. This is one of those just really cushy jobs. I think it's an $80,000 salary. They meet once a month. So just the hypocrisy of that alone is borderline comical. But yeah, everybody is jumpy, and I think J.B. Pritzker coming out, and he was the first one yesterday to really step forward and say Tim Mapes needs to resign. And of course, he's the same guy who during the primary wouldn't say one bad word about Joe Barry or Mike Madigan. But now that he's the nominee, suddenly he has a spine, and frankly, he doesn't need Mike Madigan anymore. He is kind of coasting through this campaign. He's not fearful of this organization anymore. So yes, everyone's very jumpy.
Now, coasting through this campaign, you tweeted out because there was other development yesterday that didn't receive as much attention because of all the MAPE stuff going on. But State Senator Karen McConaughey from Kane County announced that she is not seeking re-election. And you tweeted out something that she said she's looking for other opportunities. You talked about perhaps there being something, quote unquote, big in the works for McConaughey. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Well, this is just rumor, okay? This is just rumor, so please take it as that. But I have heard over the past couple of months that Governor Rauner is very discouraged. He and his wife do not want to write big checks anymore. They're tired of self-funding this campaign. He sees the numbers. He's worried he can't win. And there were some discussions about replacing him on the ticket. I know it sounds totally bizarre, and that's why I'm couching this as just rumor, but one of the names was Karen McConaughey, and it just struck me as an unusual time for her to be stepping down. She's kind of been a rising star in the legislature during all this Me Too because she heads up the Ethics Commission. And so maybe she's just going to scoot over to like some sort of internal job in the General Assembly. That's possible. Maybe she's going to go to the private sector. But her name did come up as someone who could be sort of a standby if Rauner decided he was going to get out of the race. I don't
That's all right.
think
we already talked about Todd Ricketts being offered that position.
Yes,
allegedly.
Exactly.
Another
no,
rumor.
It's really not a rumor, Dan.
Well,
I mean, and then there was money talked and how much money he'd be paid, and given his campaign if he took the reins from Governor Rauner.
Well, it's just worth noting because these rumors, we're here in the first week of June, and these rumors still persist. You're 5 months from the election.
Yes, and I mean, just watching Rauner's campaign, he really just seems not even be trying, and so that just kind of feeds more of the speculation that maybe he's going to give up and that he's willing to give up the seat because he knows that he can't win and he'd rather see a Republican take another shot at it. Now, I've heard other people say it would never happen. His ego is way too big to do something like that, but it's early and yet it's not. And I just don't see a lot of enthusiasm on his side. You got to start campaigning, and I'm not seeing it.
And he's a businessman. I mean, pretty savvy businessman. Why is he going to want to throw away millions of dollars if he knows he's going to lose?
Exactly, especially when JB came out and said he's going to double down. For every dollar Rauner spends, he's going to spend $2.
Oh, my gosh.
We've got to ask you about this report in the Chicago Tribune earlier this week. I mean, blockbuster report about the incidents of sexual abuse, assault improper conduct by teachers and school administrators in CPS over the last, I think the period they looked at actual cases was from 2011 to present. And speaking of reckonings, what about the reckoning for ROM, for the city council, for the bureaucracy at CPS in the wake of that report?
I mean, that is just so shocking and abysmal. And the buck does stop with Rob. And I think he gets away too often. He's done a really good job of separating himself from what happens at CPS, just messaging wise. He doesn't even really get asked about it a lot by the media. A couple of months ago, the state took over all the special education components of CPS because they were dropping the ball so all the time with special ed. He really didn't get asked about that. But this is one of those issues where the buck does stop with him. And that story posted, I think, early on Friday or late Thursday, and it still took 3 or 4 days for him to come out and acknowledge responsibility. But it's big. I mean, this is going to give his opponents a lot of ammunition in the mayor's race.
All right. She is Kristen McQueary, Chicago Tribune columnist and editorial board member, who will be sitting in for you tomorrow, Amy, when you're off doing your Day of Beauty or whatever you're doing.
A Day of Beauty.
Yes.
I'm going to a wedding.
Kristen, thanks so much for joining us.
Big shoes to fill, Amy. I look forward to it.
Yes, bring food for the crew.
Exactly.
Okay, I will.
Or may I suggest Uber Eats from McDonald's?
Bring food or cash, one of the two. Thanks, Kristen.
Oh, my goodness. All right, bye.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer.